The soft morning light poured through the large windows of the Italian countryside studio. Birds sang faintly outside as the film crew prepared for another long day of shooting. Cameras rolled, makeup artists whispered, and scripts rustled like quiet waves. Inside that warm, golden light, Sandra Bullock sat silently in her chair, looking down at the pages of her script. The scene they were about to film was heavy, about love and loss, and for days her heart had felt the same weight as the story itself. She was one of the strongest actresses in Hollywood, but lately something inside her felt fragile. It had been a year since her mother passed away, yet memories still followed her into every scene. She smiled when the director called for energy, but behind that smile was an ache she could not hide. The film's theme, hope after loss, had touched something too real in her. The crew noticed her quietness, the way she stayed apart, drinking her coffee alone after every take. Keanu Reeves watched her from across the set. He had known her for decades, from the days when they laughed between takes on their first movie together. He had always admired her strength, her ability to turn pain into art. But this time, something was different. Her eyes looked distant, almost trapped in another world. He didn't want to intrude, but he also couldn't watch her sink deeper into silence. The director shouted action, and the cameras began rolling. The scene required Sandra to stand by a window, reading a letter that spoke of a love that never returned. Her voice trembled beautifully, the way only real emotion can. But when the scene ended, she didn't break character. She stayed by the window, looking outside as if her soul was lost there. The crew fell silent, unsure if they should clap or give her space. Keanu walked toward her quietly. He didn't speak at first. He simply placed a small folded paper beside her cup and walked away. She noticed it but didn't open it right away. Later, during lunch break, when everyone was chatting, she opened the note. It said only 3 words, written in neat handwriting. "You are enough." It was simple, but those words melted something inside her. She looked around but couldn't find Keanu. He was by the camera, checking the lights with the crew as if nothing happened. That night, she went home and placed the note inside her diary. She didn't know it yet, but this small gesture was only the beginning of something that would heal her in the most unexpected way. The next morning, Keanu noticed that she smiled a little more. It wasn't a full smile, but it was there, like a candle flickering in the wind. He decided that he wanted to help her find laughter again, not through advice or sympathy, but through something deeper and lighter at the same time, kindness that could make her forget pain, even for a moment. During the following days, the atmosphere on set became tense again. The scene they were shooting was emotional, and Sandra struggled to hold back tears. Between takes, she would sit quietly, holding her coffee cup. One afternoon, Keanu saw her cup left unattended near the props table. He took it gently and replaced it with another one he had brought earlier. It looked identical, but on it were engraved the words, "Smile. You taught the world how." He didn't tell anyone. He just waited. When the next break came, Sandra picked up her cup and noticed something strange. She stared at the words for a long moment. For the first time in days, she let out a small laugh, a real one. She asked around who had done it, but everyone shrugged. Keanu acted innocent, but his eyes had that quiet sparkle of mischief that only true friends share. The next scene was even heavier than before. It was the climax of the movie, a moment where her character says goodbye to the person she loves most. As the cameras rolled, tears streamed down her face, not because of the lines, but because she felt something real inside her heart. When the director yelled cut, the studio went silent again. Her breathing was uneven, and for a second she forgot where she was. Then suddenly, a burst of laughter echoed across the room. Everyone turned. Keanu stood near the doorway, dressed in a ridiculous costume from another film, holding a fake flower and pretending to be part of the scene. The crew couldn't hold back their laughter. Sandra stared for a second, confused, then laughed so hard that tears of joy replaced the tears of sorrow. It was spontaneous, pure and healing. The director smiled, letting the cameras keep rolling. That laughter, captured by accident, became one of the most beautiful moments of the entire production. Sandra covered her face with her hands, unable to stop laughing. She looked at Keanu, shaking her head, and whispered, "You are impossible." He replied softly, "Only when needed." The rest of the crew clapped, and for the first time in weeks, the energy on set felt alive again. Sandra's laughter had filled the room, echoing against the studio walls. Little did she know, there was a deeper reason behind Keanu's prank, one she would only discover much later. That night, as she sat in her trailer, she thought about everything that had happened. She still didn't know who put the message on her coffee cup, but she felt warmth she hadn't felt in months. She realized how rare it was for someone to notice silent pain and heal it without words. That thought stayed with her as she closed her eyes. The next morning, the director approached her with a strange smile. "Sandra," he said, "we're keeping that laughter scene. It was real. It was beautiful. It was you." Her heart fluttered. She nodded slowly and said, "It wasn't just me." She looked across the set where Keanu stood, holding his script, pretending to focus on his lines. He smiled faintly, knowing she understood, but neither of them spoke. Some kindnesses don't need to be explained. They are felt quietly, like sunlight warming a cold room. As the filming continued, Sandra noticed something unusual. Every morning, near her makeup mirror, she found a new note. One said, "The world needs your light." Another said, "Your smile changes the air." She didn't know who was writing them, but each message made her mornings a little brighter. Keanu never admitted it. He simply kept being his quiet, kind self, helping crew members, thanking assistants, and listening to everyone with gentle respect. People admired his calm nature, but very few saw the deeper kindness that moved behind every small action. Days passed, scenes changed, but the bond between Keanu and Sandra grew stronger again, just like the early days of their friendship. She began laughing more often, and even her acting felt lighter, freer. The film's tone started to shift too, as if her energy had infected the whole crew with hope. Then, one afternoon, a new twist arrived. The assistant director rushed into the room, holding a small old photograph that someone had slipped under the studio door. It showed a much younger Sandra, smiling beside her mother on the set of their first film. On the back of the photo, in faded ink, were the words, "When she forgets to smile, remind her the world still needs it." Sandra froze. Her mother had written that note years ago. She remembered showing it to only one person back then, Keanu. She looked across the set. He was standing quietly near the lights, adjusting a cable, pretending not to notice her. Her eyes filled with tears, but this time they were tears of warmth, of gratitude, of deep understanding. She realized that the prank, the cup, the laughter, all of it had been his way of keeping her mother's words alive. And at that moment, something inside her healed. The director called action again, but before stepping into her role, she turned to Keanu and whispered, "Thank you for reminding me." He just smiled, nodded, and said, "You reminded yourself," and that was the beginning of the laughter that would soon touch millions. The next few days moved with a strange calm across the Italian studio. The morning light always touched the old stone walls first, painting the set in soft gold before the day began. The film crew started early, arranging props, testing microphones, and whispering cues. But now, there was something new in the air. Ever since that laughter, everyone felt lighter. It was as if one small spark of joy had rippled across the entire team. Sandra arrived quietly, as she always did, her hair tied back, her script in hand, and her eyes carrying that familiar mix of focus and emotion. She had learned to wear strength like a costume, yet inside, she was still fragile in places she never showed. When she stepped onto the set that morning, she noticed something beside her coffee cup again. Another folded note, small and neat, waiting just where she left her things. She looked around. The crew was busy with lights. Keanu stood a few feet away, talking to the cinematographer. Pretending not to notice, she opened the note slowly. It said, "The world needs your light." She didn't move for a while. Her fingers trembled slightly, and then she smiled. That quiet smile that reaches the heart before it reaches the lips. She didn't say anything, but her day began differently after that. She acted with more ease, her voice sounded softer, and even between takes, she laughed with the crew again. Keanu noticed. He didn't take credit, didn't expect thanks. He just watched from the corner, happy to see her spirit returning. He had learned long ago that the smallest act of kindness could heal things no words ever could. It was something he lived by, something he rarely spoke about. As the day went on, the weather turned rough. Heavy clouds rolled across the hills outside, and rain began tapping against the glass roof of the studio. The director decided to pause shooting for an hour until the light improved. The crew gathered near the heaters, drinking coffee, sharing stories. Sandra stayed near the window, watching the rain fall. Keanu walked over quietly, holding 2 mugs. He offered one to her. "Rain and silence," he said softly. "Good combination for thinking," she nodded, smiling faintly. "I do too much of that, thinking?" He asked. "Yes," she said, "and missing." There was a long pause. Keanu didn't fill it with empty words. He just stood there beside her, listening to the sound of the rain. Sometimes silence between 2 people says more than 100 perfect sentences. After a while, Sandra turned and asked gently, "Was it you?" Keanu looked at her, pretending not to understand. "Was what me?" "The cup," she said. "And the notes," he smiled softly. "Maybe the studio has a very kind ghost." She laughed quietly. "If it does, I hope it stays." Keanu looked outside, his voice calm. "Kind ghosts don't stay. They move on after they fix what was broken." Those words sank deep into her heart. She looked at him, wondering what he really meant. But before she could ask, the assistant director called everyone back. The filming resumed. They were shooting an intense scene where Sandra's character confronts her own past. She had to cry, then laugh, then cry again, all within a few minutes. As the cameras rolled, something unexpected happened. A small bird, trapped in the studio, fluttered through the set and landed right on the window beside her. Instead of breaking character, Sandra looked at the bird, smiled, and let her dialogue flow naturally. It turned into one of the most beautiful takes the director had ever seen. When the scene ended, everyone clapped. Even the director, who rarely showed emotion, stood up and said, "That wasn't acting, that was truth." Sandra felt her eyes well up. She looked toward Keanu, who was still behind the camera, nodding with quiet approval. It wasn't just the scene that moved her. It was the realization that she could feel again, freely, fully, without fear. After the shoot, she sat outside the studio steps, watching the sunset. Keanu joined her, sitting a few feet away. For a while, they said nothing. The evening sky turned orange. The sound of crickets filled the air. Finally, she said, "You've always had this way of helping people without trying. How do you do it?" He thought for a moment. "Someone once told me that kindness doesn't always need to be seen. It just needs to reach." She looked at him curiously. "Someone told you that?" He nodded. "Yes, a long time ago. Someone special. She didn't know it yet, but that person was her mother. Years ago, during the filming of their first movie, her mother had spoken those exact words to Keanu. He never forgot them. The next morning, something new happened. A small envelope was placed on the main props table with Sandra's name on it. No one knew who left it. She opened it carefully, expecting another short message. But this time it wasn't words. It was a photograph. It showed her years ago, standing beside her mother on the set of their very first movie. The back of the photograph had faint handwriting that read, "When she forgets to smile, remind her the world still needs it." Her breath caught in her throat. She ran her fingers over the faded letters, her heart pounding. She remembered that note. Her mother had written it decades ago, and only one other person had ever seen it, Keanu. She turned slowly, scanning the set. Keanu was standing near the lights, quietly helping a technician fix a stand. She watched him for a long moment. No words were needed. Everything made sense now. The cup, the notes, the laughter, the prank. It was all his way of honoring what her mother once said. For the rest of the day, Sandra carried the photograph with her. Every time she looked at it, she smiled. Her laughter that had once vanished was alive again, warm and genuine. She realized that true kindness doesn't announce itself. It moves quietly, like a breeze through an open window, touching hearts without leaving a name. That evening, after everyone left, she stayed behind. She found Keanu sitting near the piano in the corner of the studio. The lights were dim, the sound of distant rain echoed softly. She walked over and placed the photograph beside him. "You kept her words alive," she said softly. Keanu looked at the photo, then back at her. "She had beautiful words," he replied. Sandra smiled. "She liked you, you know." "I liked her too," he said. She believed in light, even in darkness. They sat there for a while, both quiet, both thinking about the same thing. Kindness that travels through time. As they left the studio, Sandra turned and looked back once more at the empty set. "Thank you," she said. Keanu shook his head gently. "Don't thank me. Thank the laughter. It brought you back." And for the first time in a long while, Sandra felt peace in her heart. The next morning came with a soft glow over the hills of the Italian countryside. Fog still clung to the narrow roads leading to the studio, and the smell of rain from the night before lingered in the air. Sandra arrived early that day, holding her diary close to her chest. She had written about everything, the laughter, the notes, the photograph, and how each small act had begun to mend something inside her. She didn't tell anyone, not even Keanu, but for the first time in a long while, she woke up feeling light. Inside the studio, the crew was already preparing for one of the film's most emotional scenes. The director had decided to shoot the sequence in a single long take, a risk that could either break or elevate the film. Sandra's role in this scene required her to show the transition from grief to acceptance, a feeling she had struggled to express for weeks. But now, somehow, she felt ready. As she sat in the makeup chair, she noticed something new beside her mirror. Not a note this time, but a tiny folded paper crane. It was neatly placed next to her script. When she unfolded its wings gently, she saw a small line written inside. "Every smile builds a bridge back to yourself." She smiled and looked around, but Keanu was nowhere in sight. He was probably already on set, helping the lighting crew like he always did. It amazed her how he treated everyone with the same respect, no matter their role, no matter their status. He listened to sound operators with the same attention he gave the director. He thanked even the janitors every evening before leaving. That quiet humility was what made his kindness feel so genuine. The director called everyone together for rehearsal. As Sandra took her place by the window, Keanu stood across from her, ready for his part. The set fell silent. The only sound was the faint hum of rainwater dripping from the roof outside. "Action," the director whispered. The cameras started rolling. In the scene, their characters had not spoken for years. Sandra's character carried guilt. Keanu's character carried forgiveness. They stood apart, separated by silence, until she finally broke down. Her voice trembled as she said the lines, her eyes filling with real tears. The pain in her words didn't feel like acting. It felt like release. Keanu stepped forward slowly, speaking his lines in that calm, warm tone he was known for. When he said the final line, "You don't have to carry it alone anymore," something changed in the air. Sandra looked into his eyes, and for a moment she forgot the cameras existed. What she saw there wasn't just her scene partner. It was someone who had carried her pain quietly until she was ready to let it go. The director whispered, "Cut." But nobody moved. Even the crew stood frozen, some with tears in their eyes. The scene was perfect, too real to repeat. When the silence finally broke, the room filled with applause. Sandra turned away, wiping her tears, but she was smiling. Keanu gave a small nod, the kind that said everything without needing a single word. After that scene, something shifted between them, not in fame or drama, but in unspoken respect. They had always been friends, but now they shared something deeper, something beyond the film. It was a quiet understanding built through kindness, trust, and the gentle power of laughter. Later that evening, when most of the crew had gone, Sandra found Keanu sitting outside near the old stone wall behind the studio. He was feeding a stray cat that often wandered around the set. The sky above them was filled with stars, and the smell of wet earth mixed with the soft sound of crickets. "You never stop helping, do you?" she said, sitting beside him. He chuckled. "I just don't like seeing anything hungry. Even lost souls?" she asked. He looked at her thoughtfully. "Especially lost souls." For a moment, neither spoke. Then she said quietly, "You know, my mother used to say that laughter is like sunlight. Even if you don't see where it lands, it still warms someone." Keanu smiled. "She was right. I think she'd be happy to see you now," Sandra said softly. "You kept her light alive." He looked down at the cat and whispered, "She's still here through you," that night. As Sandra drove home through the narrow Italian roads, she couldn't stop thinking about how kindness works, how it doesn't always need grand gestures. Sometimes it's a simple note, a shared smile, or a quiet prank that helps someone remember who they are. She realized that the laughter Keanu had brought back into her life wasn't just a joke. It was healing disguised as humor. A few days later, the production team decided to film a behind-the-scenes documentary for the movie. They wanted to capture the making of the story and the bond between the cast. During one interview, the reporter asked Sandra, "There was a moment on set when you couldn't stop laughing. Everyone said it changed the mood of the film. What happened that day?" She smiled, remembering. "A prank," she said simply. "But not the kind that embarrasses someone. It was the kind that saves you." The reporter looked puzzled. "Saves you?" Sandra nodded. "Yes. Sometimes laughter doesn't just break tension. It breaks silence. It brings you back when you're lost." That short clip went viral long before the movie even released. Fans began sharing the interview with the caption, "Kindness can wear humor's disguise." No one knew the full story behind it, and neither Sandra nor Keanu explained. They wanted it to stay pure, between them. But then came the day of the film's final scene, the emotional goodbye. The entire crew gathered, knowing it would be a long and difficult day. Before they began, Keanu placed something in Sandra's hand. It was a small folded note written on the same paper he used for the earlier messages. It said, "When the scene ends, remember to laugh again." She held it close as they began shooting. The scene unfolded beautifully, filled with emotion. When it ended, the director yelled, "Cut," and silence filled the room once more. Sandra turned toward Keanu, tears still on her cheeks, and started laughing softly through them. The director captured that moment, the mix of laughter and tears, and kept it in the final cut of the film. It became the movie's most powerful moment. As the credits rolled weeks later in the editing room, the director whispered, "That laughter, that wasn't acting, was it?" The editor smiled. "No, that was life." And it truly was. Because behind every scene, behind every joke, and behind every quiet act of compassion was something much greater. A friendship built on respect, humility, and the kind of kindness that heals in silence. Days turned into weeks, and the film neared its final schedule. The Italian studio felt like a second home now, filled with laughter, memories, and the quiet magic that Keanu and Sandra had unknowingly spread across the crew. What began as a story about loss had become a journey of rediscovered light. One morning before filming, Sandra arrived to find the entire crew gathered around a screen. Someone had uploaded a short behind-the-scenes clip of her laughing uncontrollably during Keanu's prank. It had gone viral overnight. Comments flooded. The post, saying things like this, "Laughter feels like healing and kindness, never needed words." She watched the clip in silence, her eyes soft. Keanu stood nearby, smiling quietly as if he had already expected this. When she looked at him, he shrugged playfully and said, "Guess your laughter decided to travel." That day's shooting was meant to be calm, a reflective scene between their characters. But the energy in the studio felt different, lighter, almost joyful. People were laughing, helping each other, and working with new warmth. Even the director, usually strict and silent, cracked a few jokes before calling for action. When the cameras rolled, Sandra's eyes met Keanu's across the scene. She no longer had to pretend to smile. It came naturally now. They spoke their lines with such honesty that the director didn't call for a retake. When it ended, the room stayed still for a few seconds, like everyone was holding their breath in quiet awe. Later, during lunch, Sandra walked up to Keanu holding something small in her hand. A folded note. She placed it in front of him and said, "My turn." He unfolded it. Inside, written in her handwriting, were the words you reminded the world what gentle strength looks like. He looked at her, a little surprised. "You're learning the art of quiet messages," he said with a smile. "I had a good teacher," she replied. As the final shooting days passed, something even more unexpected happened. The director announced that he wanted to include a short real-life moment at the end of the film, a brief clip of the cast sharing genuine laughter, not acting. The crew voted, and everyone agreed that the best moment was the one from Keanu's prank. Sandra laughed when she heard that. "So the prank that broke my sadness ends up closing the movie?" Keanu nodded. "Seems perfect, doesn't it?" The film wrapped 2 days later. When they watched the final version together, the ending showed her laughing, wiping tears, and looking at Keanu while the screen faded to black. The audience in the private screening hall was silent for a moment, then erupted into applause. But the most powerful moment came after. As the credits rolled, a simple line appeared on screen, inspired by true kindness on set. Sandra turned to Keanu, her voice soft. "Did you tell them to write that?" He shook his head. "No. I think kindness told its own story." She smiled, realizing that no prank, no laughter, no scene had been random. Everything had been connected. Her mother's words, Keanu's compassion, and the quiet lesson that kindness always finds a way to return. The movie was finished, but its energy still lived inside everyone. Even after filming ended, the laughter and warmth that began from one simple prank stayed with the crew. Reporters talked about how peaceful and joyful the atmosphere on set had been, and fans were already calling it the happiest shoot of the decade. Sandra and Keanu stayed in Italy for a few more days to attend a private wrap dinner. The restaurant was small, filled with candles and the smell of fresh bread and olives. Everyone shared stories from the set, laughing about small mistakes and late nights. But beneath all the smiles, Sandra knew she needed to say something to Keanu. When the night ended, they stepped outside into the quiet street. The city lights reflected on the wet cobblestones, and the air carried a soft chill. She turned to him and said, "I know it was you all along. The notes, the cup, the prank, everything." Keanu looked at her for a moment, his expression calm, as if he had been waiting for her to say it. "You needed to laugh again," he said simply. "But you didn't have to go that far," she replied softly. "Sometimes kindness has to go far enough to reach someone who stopped believing in it," he said. His words hit her deeply. She smiled through the emotion and whispered, "You remembered what my mother said, didn't you?" He nodded. "She told me once, when we were shooting years ago, that when you forget to smile, the world gets quieter. I didn't want that world." For a few seconds, they stood in silence under the faint sound of the rain returning. It was one of those rare moments when gratitude became too big for words. Sandra stepped forward and hugged him, a quiet, genuine hug that said more than any thank you could. The next morning, the director called them to watch one last version of the film's closing credits. He had added a surprise. After the final scene, a short video clip played, behind-the-scenes shots of Keanu helping crew members laughing, with children visiting the set and quietly handing food to a lighting worker during breaks. As the video ended, a message appeared on screen. This film was built not only on art, but on kindness. The crew turned toward Keanu and applauded. He looked embarrassed, smiling shyly. Sandra whispered, "See? You finally got caught." He laughed softly. Kindness doesn't need hiding if it helps someone breathe again. When the movie released, the audience loved it, but what touched them most wasn't the story in the film. It was the real story behind it. Fans noticed the raw laughter, the warmth, the truth in their expressions. Interviews revealed the emotional journey of the shoot, and millions watched the now-famous smile scene online. A journalist later asked Sandra during a live interview, "What made that moment so special?" She paused for a moment and said, "Because it wasn't just acting. It was a reminder that one kind person can help another rediscover light." Her answer trended worldwide. Hashtags like the laughter heals and Pasha kindness first filled social media. People shared their own stories of friends who made them smile during hard times. The laughter Keanu sparked on that small set had now become a movement across the world. When Sandra met Keanu again weeks later for a film award event, she handed him a small gift. Inside was a coffee cup engraved with the same words he once gave her. "Smile, you taught the world how." Under it, she had added her own line. "And you reminded me why." Keanu smiled quietly, his eyes soft. "Guess the pranks come full circle," he said. "It was never a prank," she replied gently. "It was kindness wearing humor's disguise." And that night, as cameras flashed and applause echoed, both of them knew that laughter wasn't just entertainment. It was the sound of hope returning. Months passed since the film's release, but its warmth refused to fade. People across the world were still talking about the laughter scene, the unscripted moment that carried real emotion instead of acting. It became more than a movie moment. It became a message. In interviews, critics called it the most genuine scene ever filmed. Schools used it in emotional intelligence lessons. Psychologists spoke about how a single moment of shared laughter could heal silent pain. But behind all that praise, Keanu and Sandra stayed humble, quietly doing what they always did, spreading kindness without drawing attention to themselves. One bright morning, they were invited to an international film festival in Venice. The event was packed with stars and flashing cameras, but what made it special wasn't the glamour. It was what the organizers had planned without telling them. As the hall lights dimmed, a video began playing on the massive screen. It wasn't about their acting careers or box office numbers. It was a montage of people from around the world, students, nurses, elderly couples, and children, laughing while holding signs that said, "Thank you for reminding us to smile." The room fell silent. Sandra covered her mouth, holding back tears. Keanu sat still, his eyes glistening as he watched faces from different countries, different languages, all united by the same emotion, joy. After the video ended, the host walked onto the stage and said, "Tonight, we celebrate not just a film, but a reminder that kindness still moves the world. We honor both of you for turning laughter into healing." The audience stood up, applauding for minutes. Sandra looked at Keanu, and he whispered softly, "We didn't plan this." She smiled. "The best kindness never is." When they stepped on stage together, Sandra took the microphone first. "This started as a joke," she said, her voice calm but full of feeling. "But somewhere along the way, it became something much bigger. One small prank reminded me that even when you lose light, someone's quiet kindness can bring it back." Then Keanu spoke, his tone gentle and thoughtful. "Humor's not just for laughter," he said. "It's a bridge between hearts. And when it's built with respect and love, it can carry even the heaviest pain." The applause grew louder. Reporters wiped tears from their eyes. It was rare to see such sincerity in an industry filled with noise. After the ceremony, outside under the Venice night sky, the crowd surrounded them for photos, but they slipped away quietly, walking down the stone streets toward the waterfront. The city lights shimmered over the water. The moon reflected softly, painting everything in silver. They stopped near a small bridge, the same kind of bridge they had filmed a scene on months before. Sandra leaned on the railing and said, "You know, I used to think laughter was only part of comedy. Now I think it's part of survival." Keanu nodded. "So is kindness." A light breeze passed between them. The air smelled of the sea. For a moment, neither spoke. just watched the gentle ripples on the water. Then Sandra reached into her bag and pulled out something wrapped in paper. She handed it to him. "One last gift," she said. He opened it slowly. Inside was the photograph of Sandra and her mother, the same one with the faded handwriting on the back. She had restored it, framed it, and below it added a new line: "When laughter returns, kindness has done its work." Keanu smiled, quiet and moved. "This belongs to you," he said. "No," she replied. "It belongs to both of us, and maybe to everyone who forgot to smile." They stood there, two friends who had shared laughter, loss, and healing, knowing that their story had become something more than a film. It had become a message to the world. Weeks later, the movie's charity screenings began worldwide. All proceeds went to fund therapy programs using art and laughter for children in hospitals. Keanu and Sandra both refused personal credit. They called the campaign the Gentle Laugh Project. In one hospital video, a small girl was shown laughing as she painted a picture of two people standing under the rain, one holding a coffee cup that said, "Smile. You taught the world how." When Sandra saw that video, she whispered through tears, "Her laughter sounds like my mother's." Keanu nodded. "And now it will keep echoing." Their story, born from grief, revived by kindness, carried by laughter, had gone beyond their names. It became a symbol that love, respect, and gentle humor can heal more than pain can ever destroy. And so, their laughter didn't just steal the show. It gave the world something far greater, a reason to believe that the simplest act, the quietest kindness, and the softest laughter can still change lives. Kindness may begin with one smile, but when shared through laughter, it becomes a light the world never forgets.